The sun was not yet up, but the cold had long since settled in. Frost clung to the ragged grass and curled around the bones of fence posts like it meant to choke the breath from the earth itself. A hard wind swept down off the hills, dragging the scent of old wood smoke and mule dung through the empty road. Behind the auction house, a woman stood with her back to the wall, arms wrapped tight around her ribs, like she might fall apart if she let go. Her dress was the wrong color for winter. Summer gingham faded at the seam sleeves, too short for January. Mud climbed her hemline like it had been following her for days. It had. Her shoes were cracked. The skin at her knuckles was split from the cold, and the nails bore half-moons of dirt from digging where she wasn't meant to. She did not cry. There was no one left to notice if she had. The bell rang once sharp and mean. Inside voices rose low, greedy, impatient. The children were behind her, huddled in a wooden crate lined with an old horse blanket. Four of them stacked close for warmth like pups born out of season. Their cheeks were hollow, their eyes too still. The smallest one coughed and curled tighter beneath the blanket. No one spoke. They had learned when to be invisible. A man opened the back door of the building and looked her over like a mule. She didn't flinch. That was important. She kept her jaw tight and her eyes down. "You're up," he said, voice already bored. "Take the smallest one with you. Rest can stay till after." She picked up the child, the boy with the cough, and stepped into the auction room. The heat slapped her. Sweat and bodies, tobacco, spit, and wool coats. Men sat on benches and leaned against the walls, hats, blue eyes sharp. She felt them count her bones. "This here's lot 27, the man announced. "Healthy girl, fair worker, not local. Says she can sew, cook, and tend stock." One child included three more negotiable. She did not look up. The boy in her arms pressed his face into her neck. Bidding started low. She heard the numbers like stones dropping into water. It did not feel like her life anymore. Just a noise, and then a silence. A final voice, firm and disinterested. "Sold." Her name was not asked. Her opinion was not wanted. The man who bought her did not smile. He signed something in pencil and stepped outside without a word. She was motioned to follow. She glanced once back at the crate, but the other children were already being taken away. The buyer's wagon was parked crooked near the trough. A pale horse hitched to it, restless in the cold. She climbed into the back without asking the boy, still wrapped in her arms like a second heartbeat. They rode for hours. He did not speak. Neither did she. The land outside the town was flat and scabbed with snow patches. Trees leaned with the wind, tired of standing straight. Fence lines twisted away like they were giving up. The road narrowed, then turned into nothing at all. By the time they reached his homestead, the sky had darkened at the edges. A rough-built house stood against the slope, the roof patched with different shades of wood like an old quilt. Smoke rose from the chimney. No other buildings stood nearby. He stopped the wagon, stepped down, and opened the door to his house. She climbed out, slowly, joints stiff back, aching from holding the boy. Inside it was warm but plain. One room. A stove, a table, a bed. No pictures. No books. "There's beans on the stove," he said. His voice was deep, flat. "Water in the bucket. Wood outside." She nodded. He sat at the table and unlaced his boots. She fed the child first little mouthfuls of bean mash and cold cornbread she found in a tin. Then she laid him on a folded coat near the stove and crouched down beside him. Her knees burned. Her throat burned worse. Outside, the wind pressed hard against the walls. She did not know this man's name. He had bought her, but he hadn't touched her, hadn't looked long. Just led her here like he might lead a cow to shelter. She curled beside the child and closed her eyes. The wind howled, and the silence between them began. The stove cracked once, then settled. It was the only sound in the room besides the boy's breathing, shallow whistle but steady. The woman didn't sleep. She lay curled like a question mark on the wooden floor, blanketless hands beneath her head to keep her face off the cold boards. The man had taken the bed, but not in any way that suggested cruelty, just the quiet assumption of routine. His back was to her. No boots, no words. In the still dark before dawn, she slipped outside. Snow had fallen during the night, not deep but mean, the kind that cut instead of blanketed. She walked to the shed and found the woodpile, her fingers going stiff after 3 pieces. She carried them in anyway. Her breath steamed. The second trip she made with her arms folded around more wood than she could carry easily. She didn't drop a single piece. By the time he rose, she'd swept the floor with a broom she found behind the stove. She'd boiled the beans again and made a little pan bread dry but warm. The boy sat at the table, pale and blinking. He looked at her. His eyes were the color of burnt straw. "You don't talk much," he said. Her voice was rough from disuse. "No." He nodded once. "That's fine." She set a plate in front of him. Not hers. One of two in the cupboard. Tin. Dented. Still clean. "Your name?" she asked. He chewed a moment before answering. "Carver." She waited. Nothing else came. She didn't ask again. Later, he hitched the horse and left. Said nothing of when he'd return, but left the door unlatched. A kind of trust or carelessness. It was hard to tell the difference. She washed the plates in snowmelt and began exploring the room. One pair of boots. One coat. A rifle above the door. Rope hanging on a nail. A cracked cup by the bedside. The corners of the room were swept, but the dust lingered in the seams of the windowsill. A man lived here, but not a life. She went outside with the child wrapped tight to her back in a sheet. Behind the house was a chicken coop with no chickens. Beyond that, a lean-to half collapsed under the weight of snow. She followed the fence line and found 2 goats in a pen, small and hungry-looking. She scratched one behind the ear and it didn't startle. Back inside, she found a notebook tucked under the stove. Blank pages. A stub of a pencil. She stared at them a long time before placing them back exactly as they'd been. By evening, Carver returned. He carried a sack over one shoulder and a rabbit in his hand. She didn't ask where he'd been. He didn't ask what she'd done. She cleaned the rabbit in silence and cooked it with onion and dry herbs she found in a tin above the stove. He watched her closely, not with suspicion, but something quieter. A careful noticing. The boy sat between them on the floor, eating with small, greedy hands. When the sun dipped and the shadows rose up from the corners of the room, Carver leaned back in his chair. "I didn't mean to buy you," he said, eyes fixed on the flame behind the stove grate. "Wasn't looking for no one." She looked at him. The fire lit the line of his jaw, the narrow ridge of scar that ran beneath his ear like an old map line. "Why did you raise your hand?" she asked. His eyes flicked to hers, surprised, like he hadn't expected her to speak again. "Man next to me said something ugly. About the boy. About all 4. She waited. "I figured if someone was gonna win, ought not be him." She nodded once. "You bought the wrong girl." Carver's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but something near it. "Maybe," he said. "Then maybe not." The wind blew hard that night. The child slept deeper. Carver stayed up late, whittling something small in his hands. A shape not yet finished. She watched from the floor and pulled the blanket higher over the boy's back. No one told her to be grateful. No one asked her to stay. But she stayed. "If this land spoke to you, follow us deeper into the frontier." The days settled into a rhythm, the kind that made no promises but kept time all the same. Morning came with wind, with pale lights slanting through cracks in the shutters, and the steady coughing breath of the boy by her side. She'd rise before Carver stoked the fire, fetch the water, and start the day's small work, because even when a life feels borrowed, a woman's hands keep moving. Carver said little. He mended fence lines, chopped wood, and once dug out a frozen pipe with nothing but a hammer and quiet cursing. She watched him through the window. He moved with the kind of patience that came from years of not expecting much to change. The child Samuel grew quieter still, but he followed her now. Everywhere, one small hand always at her hip. His cough eased some and color returned to his cheeks. He would sit near the stove with the carved animals. Carver began making in the evenings, nothing grand, just small things, a mule, a dog, a horse with a leg too short. The boy lined them up like a parade and fell asleep beside them. She spoke little, but not out of fear anymore. More like she was relearning how. Her words came in pieces tied to action here as she handed him a plate. Wait when the wind turned mean. Careful when he reached for a hot pot. He never asked about her past. Not about the man who left her with 4 mouths to feed and a debt note pinned to the door. Not about the miles she walked with blistered feet and bleeding hands. Not even when she woke in the dark chest, heaving lips, moving around names she hadn't spoken aloud in months. But once after supper, as the wind howled like a dog gone mad, he said, "They're not dead, are they?" The others. Her hand stilled on the table. "No," she said. "Not yet." "Where?" "Rail camp, south of Larkspur. A woman there said she'd take them. For now. For now, don't last long in places like that." She met his eyes across the flickering candlelight. "I know." A silence stretched between them, not sharp but deep, like a canyon carved slow by water and regret. He rose, crossed to the stove, and set another log in the fire. When he turned, he asked, "You want them back?" She didn't answer right away. The truth hurt to say. "Yes," she whispered. "If I still can." Carver nodded once, slow. "Then we better figure a way." From that moment, the silence between them changed. It wasn't absence anymore. It was weight shared. Not easily, but honestly. He began showing her how to fix the hinges on the barn door, how to trap rabbits without bruising the meat, how to read the sky by the smell of the wind. She kept up. She worked harder than most men he'd known. She split logs until her hands bled, then wrapped them in cloth and kept splitting. He taught her how to shoot. Not just hold the rifle, but use it. The first time she missed, she didn't blink. The second, she adjusted. The third, she hit clean through the tin can. "Good," he said, offering nothing more. One night, weeks in, she found a bundle on her side of the floor, a thick wool blanket, neatly folded. No words. She laid it over Samuel and tucked it under his chin. Then she turned and looked at Carver, sitting by the stove, carving another small horse. "Thank you," she said. He looked up. "It's cold." She smiled barely. "Still, thank you." That night, she didn't dream of the auction, or the miles, or the hunger. She dreamed of 4 small faces running toward her, laughter rising like spring water. And she woke with her hand on her heart, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar ache of hope. Spring came slow, dragging its feet like an old mule reluctant to leave the barn. Snow shrank back into the hills, leaving behind mud, thick as bread dough in a world colored in dull brown. But shoots came, green ones, thin blades, pushing up through muck like they meant to live, no matter what. Carver built her a garden box beside the south wall of the house, where the sun hit longest. He didn't say he was doing it. Just came in one evening with soil under his nails and said, "Ground soft enough now." She knew what it meant. The next morning, she planted beans, then onions, then beets, because they held well. Samuel helped, his hands eager, his knees muddy by noon. They worked side by side in silence, her whispering instructions him, nodding solemnly like he was much older than his 5 years. Carver brought her seed potatoes the next week. Traded for 'em, he said. Figured you'd know what to do. She looked at him and nodded. That was enough. They did not speak of love. Not the word. Not the idea. But it grew same as the seedlings. Slow. Deliberate. Not something you reach for so much as something you notice one day steady and rooted beside you. She caught him watching her once when her sleeves were rolled and her hair tied up, sweat tracing the line of her neck. He didn't look away when she met his eyes. Didn't smile either. Just held her gaze like it mattered. She touched his hand later lightly when she passed him a tin cup of water. His fingers didn't pull away. That night, he took the floor. She stood a long-time blanket in her hands before crossing to the bed. I can sleep here, she said. It's wide enough. He didn't answer, just nodded. Lay down beside her with a full foot of space in between. They did not touch, but she slept. The letter came one morning in late April when the birds had just returned to the trees and the first bloom showed on the wild plum bush. Carver found it in town, folded in thirds, no envelope. She opened it with careful fingers and read it once. Then again. Bad news? He asked. Worse than that, she said. It's a price. She set it on the table. He read it slow. The woman in Larkspur would not keep the other 3 past May. She was moving on with the camp and there were no homes left to take them. If they weren't claimed, they'd be split boys to one place, girl to another. All far. Carver folded the letter and looked at her. How far's Larkspur? 3 days by wagon. 4 with a child. He nodded. She said nothing more. That night, she packed a bundle with a change of clothes, a jar of beans, and what little coin she'd saved from mending and stitching in town. Carver watched her from the doorway. Taking the wagon, he asked, No, I'll walk. He paused. Not by yourself, you won't. She looked at him wary. You don't owe me anything. His eyes narrowed. It ain't about owing. The next morning, he hitched the horse. Samuel climbed in first, holding the little wooden dog Carver had carved for him. She stood with her hand on the gate, staring at the house. It's all right, he said. What is? You can come back. She didn't speak, but her shoulders eased. Just slightly. They set off, just after sunup. The road was rutted, but the light was good and the wind soft. For the first time in months, she felt something beneath the skin of fear. A thread of possibility, of getting them back, of coming home. The road to Larkspur wound through dry gullies and scrubbed thick valleys past old telegraph poles, leaning like drunks and fence lines long since forgotten. They rode in silence most of the first day. Carver drove with one hand, the other resting on his thigh, thumb tapping a slow rhythm. Samuel dozed in her lap, warm and quiet, one hand curled around her braid like a lifeline. At nightfall, they stopped near a dried creek bed. She gathered kindling while Carver unhitched the horse and laid out a tarp. They ate cold beans and cornbread by firelight backs to the wind. He didn't ask questions, but she spoke anyway. He wasn't cruel, my husband. Not at first. Just weak. Got behind on things, started blaming the world. Then blaming me. Carver tossed a twig into the fire. When he left, I figured it was just another bad spell. But the debts were worse than I knew. Took everything. She didn't look at him when she said it. Carver stared into the flames. Weak men do more damage than wicked ones. She nodded. I buried my mother 2 months later. There was no one else. They didn't speak of it again. The second day, rain rolled in. Thin, persistent soaking. They rode through it, cloaks drawn close. The wagon wheels caught in mud twice, and both times she helped dig them free, knees deep in the slop breath, coming in grunts. Carver didn't stop her. Didn't thank her either. Just worked beside her like it was a fact that she was there strong and capable. That night they found shelter in an abandoned line shack. The roof leaked in one corner, but the stove still worked. She dried Samuel's clothes by the fire while Carver rubbed the horse down in silence. Later, when the boy was asleep, she sat at the edge of the bedroll and looked at Carver across the dark. "I'm scared I won't know them," she said. "The others. It's been too long." He leaned back against the wall, arms crossed. "They'll know you," he said. She closed her eyes, held the words like warmth between her palms. On the third day, they reached the edge of the camp. Larkspur was not a town so much as a temporary promise. Tents scattered among felled trees, rail lines stretching like scars into the distance. Smoke rose from cook fires. Men shouted. Wagons groaned under weight. She climbed down from the seat and straightened her dress with shaking hands. Carver touched her elbow, a steadying weight. "I'll wait here," he said. She nodded, then walked. The woman who had taken the children looked older than she remembered. Her hands were chapped and her apron stained. The three children sat on a bench outside the mess tent, eating boiled potatoes with their fingers. They didn't see her at first. Then her daughter looked up, and the world stopped. The girl stood slowly like a deer ready to bolt, then ran. The others followed, 4 pairs of arms wrapped around her. Muddy boots, potato-slick hands, breathless sobs. "I'm sorry," she whispered again and again, kissing their cheeks, their hair pressing their small bodies to hers like she might fuse them back into her bones. Behind her, Carver watched from the edge of the road. He did not smile, but his hand came to rest on the boy's head, gentle. Later, when the children were asleep in the back of the wagon, heads nestled together, she climbed onto the bench beside him. "Thank you," she said. Carver looked ahead, reins loose in his hands. "I didn't do it for thanks." "I know." They sat a moment listening to the wind. "Still," she said, voice quiet, "I'd like to go home now." He glanced at her, something soft passing through his eyes. "Then let's get you there." The wagon creaked under its new weight, 4 growing children, a sack of clothes, a sack of bread, and the kind of silence that comes only after something sacred is returned. The road home looked different. The same ruts, the same low hills, but the light touched everything warmer. Or maybe it was just that she could breathe now deeply without waiting for the world to take something else. She sat with her back to the bench, knees drawn up, arms around her youngest. The older ones clung together like they were afraid to sleep in separate thoughts. Carver drove with a quiet purpose, eyes on the horizon, mouth set in a line that was no longer so tight. When they reached the homestead, the goats bleated like they remembered her. The chickens had come, 6 of them, clucking wild, in a pen Carver must have fixed while she was gone. The house looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. Inside, she set the children to wash. Heated water scrubbed behind ears, checked for bruises that weren't new. The girl Elsie spoke only in whispers. The boys followed her like shadows. Samuel showed them his wooden animals and laid them out one by one like treasures. That evening, Carver brought in a bench he'd built from scrap, set it beside the table. "For them," he said, and walked out. She stood there staring at it, hand resting on the edge. The wood was sanded smooth, the legs steady. A place to sit, a place to stay. The next days blurred. She rose before the sun-braided hair cooked over fire. The children began to laugh again, soft and startled like birds. They fetched eggs, spilled milk, learned to sweep, learned to stay quiet when the wind picked up and her eyes went far. Carver gave each child a chore and never once raised his voice. When the youngest spilled the seed bucket, he bent down beside him and helped pick every kernel back up. He built a shelf, then another. She found herself humming while she mended, felt shame for it at first, then let it be. One morning, a neighbor rode up with a sack of flour and a hammer to borrow. She stood at the door, wary, 4 children behind her like fence posts. Carver came out and said her name, not the girl, not the woman, but her name. Real and plain. The neighbor tipped his hat, called her ma'am, looked at the children, and asked if they'd be coming to the spring gathering. They might, she said, if we can spare the horse. Carver chuckled from behind her. We'll spare it. That night, she found him out by the fence line, hands deep in his coat pockets, eyes turned to the sky. They're settling, he said. She stood beside him, boots in the dirt wind in her braid. They need a roof that won't leak, she said. And I can't take charity. He turned toward her. Ain't offering charity. I'm offering a partnership. Maybe more in time. She looked at him. I didn't mean to care, she said. It just happened. I know. He pulled a small object from his pocket. A wooden ring carved from oak, smooth as river stone. No polish, no flourish. Just solid round truth. I got no preacher, no papers. But I've got work to offer. And a place. And the want for something real. She took the ring, held it in her palm, looked past him at the house where light glowed through the seams and voices rose arguing over a single blanket. Then she looked back at him. Yes, she said, if you'll have all of us. His answer was a nod firm as any vow. Later that night, she tucked the children in one by one, kissed their brows, straightened the blankets. When she lay down, it was not on the floor, but beside Carver beneath quilts she'd sewn with her own hands. She fell asleep to the sound of wind outside and breath beside her, and the small weight of the wooden ring against her chest. Don't leave the campfire yet, there's another tale coming with the dawn.